Had to prepare a little bit for today's class. We are gonna look at ZBrushing today. And a little bit how I would use that tool. Nice. Yeah, I would say when it comes to ZBrushing, I would say it's not always the most used tool in every sense. Got my camera here also. It's very depending on the project, basically. So when we work more in an organic project, you would have a little bit more ZBrush being used, and maybe if it's like sci-fi or a certain art style, then it would be maybe a little bit less and more focused on box modeling in Maya or Blender together with Painter. So set up a project so we have something to work towards. No, going to start first with talking a little bit what I did here. So compared to past weeks, there's not going to be any kind of presentation. We're going to just basically sit and sculpt this a little bit. And like always, feel free to just write questions whenever you have one. It can have to do with what we're doing here on screen, but if you have just general questions, feel free to ask those also. So I'm having the chat here on my side screen. So we'll talk about a little bit first what I did for preparation here. And then we're going to jump into ZBrush. So here in Maya, clean up here a little bit. I tend to like to set up my sculpt kind of meshes in Maya or Blender. Oh, is there no audio? Daniel, then maybe, let's see, Daniel will not hear me. But it's right there. Yeah, sometimes default settings are being kind of reset and stuff like that. But yes, so there's two ways of basically going about when we are doing meshes. We can either drive them through directly in ZBrush, but I like to kind of like plan ahead a little bit. So I tend to quite cleanly block them out in Maya first or Blender and get them into the project. So for me, it's very important. And I'm just going to show a little bit what I'm doing here. Basically, when I'm doing this, I'm basically exporting my meshes. And we have talked about this in past streams, but I'm going to show it for anyone that is new here. So I'm using the game exporter. So that way I can have them kind of like on a line like this, and they will basically be saved down in my folders here. So I get them basically here. And I done a quick button, so because I don't like to have this open all the time. So I have this quick button, and I've shortcutted that. I can share this script, but it's very simple. It's just basically saying I want to click this button. So I don't have to have this open, and then I have shortcutted that, and that way I can kind of export very fastly. So that's what I'm doing here, basically, when that pops up. Awesome. Welcome, Daniel. Then in Engine, so I've set up like a test scene here. Of course, we're not going to be able to like sculpt a whole scene, so I'm going to just do a pillar here and see how far we get. Here I've split it up a little bit to make it easier with the sculpt. So we have the light kind of ball, we would call it, like where the light comes from. We have our kind of stand for the light, and then we have our pillar in itself. I separated these skulls because it's going to be easy to sculpt when they are kind of separated. They are loose. Later, I would probably combine them. I think a thing I always try to do, or rather always do, is always inspect kind of what you're working on. from kind of the viewpoint of the end result, basically, or the end goal. It's very easy to stay inside of Maya or ZBrush for a long time without knowing how it looks, basically, where it's gonna kind of end up in the end. And for us game developers, that would usually be Unreal or Unity. And when we do Portfolio, that's kind of also true, right? So I always have kind of my engine open. I try to find a very kind of convenient way to kind of move objects over and test them over and like over and over again. So for example, if let's say we want to kind of detail a little bit more on these blockouts, we can do that to just show that. So let's say we can do a little bit more with this platform maybe. I'm gonna remove this down a little bit. And what I'm doing now is basically snapping on the grid. And that way, like all the things becomes kind of like equally big here. That's also a script I've shared in past classes. I'm going to kind of pack that in the whole kind of mail that gets sent out later. I'll probably move that up also. When I do this, I like to kind of have hard and normal zone. Maybe move this up. And add an indent here maybe would be nice. And then harden that. And then testing that in engine and seeing kind of like, okay, are we happy what that does? Etc. Like now we got like a detail here, for example. Yes, Andrew. I think it's basically going to be, it's recorded and it's going to go out on the mail. And then I think it's also usually ends up on Vertex School's YouTube channel. So far, all of the kind of these live streams I've done has ended up there. But yeah, so that's kind of like how I work back and forth, and eventually I get to this result. I did like the couple of weeks ago, I did a stream on blockouts. So that can be kind of valuable to watch if you want to see a little bit how I usually block out things. And usually it's quite nice to just test until it feels detailed enough in the blockout stage. So trying to pack detail up in the corner here, maybe keeping the pillars themselves fairly simple. We could drive these through probably like a tileable or a trim, like a tileable texture. But we are going to make this very sculpty. So it's going to be more of a like a God of War type of aesthetic where they usually sculpt every detail. So I think what we can start with is sculpting the middle part here and test that out. Hello. So let's open ZBrush. And my ZBrush might look a little bit different compared to yours. So I'm going to just talk quickly about kind of customization in general. I would say that's very individually. I would always, let's say, I'm going to Blender. I would say I would say that like Blender like is industry standard. So I think if you have to pay for Maya, I would go with Blender. So for example, when I was at Ubisoft, we used Blender in the environment team. At my past studio Fall Damage, we used Blender. So I would say it's kind of industry standard now. So I would say just use Blender. Some studios you have to use Maya or you have to use 3ds Max, but then you just learn that when you are in that studio. I would say usually it goes fairly fast to kind of switch and they give you time to switch if you have to switch. Said no good answer on that with character art modeling. I would just reach out to kind of like in voicemail and ask. So far, I don't know if anything is planned, but I can forward that question and maybe we can add it in the mail if other people know at Vertex. Yeah, like I said, like Blender where I worked at, like we used it completely. So the reason why I'm in Maya is basically because Vertex school is using Maya. So usually you just kind of learn depending on the kind of like job you're working towards, basically. One thing you might notice here is that I've kind of split up in parts here, which makes it a bit easier to sculpt, basically. These I would probably just, in the end, I would kind of like just sculpt this and then copy it over and stuff like that. So we can like be smart about what we are sculpting, basically. Same with this, we probably just sculpt one of these and copy them over. But it can be nice to have the whole thing kind of like visible when we are working. So I'm gonna move this over. So sometimes it can be nice to set this up so we can subdivide this in ZBrush, meaning that we would give this kind of edges, fix these, some support edges basically. But I usually just kind of like Dynamesh basically, which is a bit faster. I can grow this. But sometimes it can be nice to prepare the mesh, and that would be to add these edge loops into every kind of corner here. When it's like stone and stuff like that, we don't have to be that kind of cautious about it. Hard surface modeling, then we have to be a little bit more kind of careful and careful with like the edge loops and stuff like that, or else we get weird things happening basically. But yeah, so that could be done like on everything, but like I said, I'm going to show kind of what I usually do. Would you say that ZBrush is the best 3D modeling software for making models plan? I would say probably not. I would probably use Blender or Maya or 3ds Max. Like I would say ZBrush is more of an extension, I would say, for what you're doing. So I can say this, that like professionally, I have not done ZBrush that much the past years. It's been mainly like on the side. So at my past studio, we did like sci-fi game, so not that much ZBrush. So it was basically only Blender happening then, and at Ubisoft, a little bit ZBrush, of course, when you're doing kind of tree trunks. I was a vegetation artist there, but in general, there also it's usually everyday work is more towards modeling, I would say, if you're not ending up in a studio that is very heavy on sculpting. So I would say like a God of War, for example, kind of the whole art direction is driven by sculpting. It depends a little bit on the visual style, or like if you do stylized. But yeah, so basically I have customized here a little bit. We can bring in the object also, so we have that. So I'm going to import here. And how I customize is basically just interface here. Now let's see, config, enable customization. And then you see kind of like it kind of pops into here. And then you can kind of detach this one by holding Control Alt left click or right click, sorry. And you can move out whatever you want basically. So I would say my tip is usually if you go into a menu and click something all the time, I would just pull it out and have it like out here. Or else, so one that I use a lot is, for example, mid value here. So I will just add that, and then I can just click enable customization, and it goes back. And then we want to store config basically, so it comes up when we open ZBrush again. Can be good also. I always recommend that to save our UI. So I have my starter content here, 3D, ZBrush. We can maybe soon a new year. I would just save my custom UI like that. So if the computer breaks down, that starter content folder I usually put to my Google Drive. So if my computer would break down or if I would have to kind of work somewhere else, I always have kind of like a quick solution for getting kind of my ZBrush windows and my hotkeys I saved there also, etc. basically. But yeah, first thing I want to do now, like I said, I want to always kind of link softwares in between each other. So first thing I want to do is just set up so I can kind of like see if we can have this going into Engine. So I'm going to save this as an FBX. So we're going to do this. I would say we just test this and see what happens. So I would basically want to just export this whole pillar. Loading a little bit now. Can read this question in the meantime. Yeah, I totally get you, Daniel. I would say like my tip there would probably be to find like communities. I think is the best kind of way. Finding ways of maybe getting to know people. I think usually it's much easier to end up in a place when they have a face. So something I did a lot in the beginning, I mean, I still do that, is going on like meetups. I would say every big studio usually have like artist meetups and stuff like that. And if you're lucky, sometimes you have like people that are in a studio at those. I've been to like drink and draws sometimes, and then it's been kind of game developers there or figure drawing. So it doesn't always have to be very like 3D heavy. It can be something a little bit different. So that would be one thing. The other thing is probably like finding like-minded people, so people that are kind of where you are at and trying to solve it together. So that I did a lot in the beginning. I found Discord communities that kind of had the same struggles as me, and we kind of tried to figure it out together, basically. And that helped me a lot, both to not lose motivation, but also just getting better, basically. Like you're figuring out things together. Um, then maybe game jams, I would say, is the last one. Like you can get to know people a lot when you do game jams. They don't have to be in person also. So that's also a way of getting to know people. And I would say sometimes there is like devs, like industry like doing game devs also because they are missing kind of that aspect of game development. I would say I think now also we are moving a little bit over to maybe like smaller studios. Like I think most of us don't really know where the industry is headed, but I think we see a lot of probably smaller studios getting started. So it's a bit uncertain what's going to happen in the future. Um, But I think the most fun aspect would be to maybe find people that you can build something together with, maybe like a smaller game in the beginning together with portfolio. That's how I started. So I did indie studio. That's kind of where I got my footing in the beginning. But yeah, my ZBrush has frozen, I think. I'm gonna give it a little bit more. You can see it's kind of like reacting, but it's like doesn't do anything. So if there is any other questions, we're gonna wait a little bit before I kind of like force restart ZBrush. I would say this is typical ZBrush for me. I feel like it's always kind of freezing for me. I'm gonna close it down. Let's import that pillar again. I have a bit hard time saying like how good movie industry is. I'm too far attached to that. But in the past, I feel like usually it's been said that the game industry is kind of a nicer place to be. I would say it's about passion also. I mean, I went into game study with the mind of moving to movies later. Like I'm a big movie buff. But then I had so much fun building games basically with other people, so I stayed in games. I think right, like my answer there is like the one that you're most passionate about, where you can kind of put like your most into basically. Because I think you need that like that kind of fire basically to build good portfolio and stuff like that, and ending up in a studio basically. You need that a bit extra, and then I think passion is part of that. Let's see if we can get it working now. Can do visible. Now it's working. Yeah, we get a little bit bug normals here, so we're going to fix that. So I'm going to use I'm going into the object here and recomputing the normals here to have. Let's see if we can if that works. Just fill in all of these. Seems like every object is its own material. So let's see if we can solve this. Worst case, it's taking it to Maya, and then yeah, we're gonna have to kind of work through Maya then. So yeah, I would say we get starting sculpting. So the idea here was basically to set up like a link between ZBrush and our rendering software, basically. But we're gonna just kind of like throw it into Maya and then harden the normals, and that way it's gonna kind of look correctly. Gonna have a empty Maya for that later. So I think we can just start with like one of the objects here. Maybe we can start with a ball instead, like it's smaller. So we have our first object here. And we're gonna probably run for like, yeah, probably 1.5 hour, 2 hours, and see how far we get basically. So this one I want to actually add a support edge. I can see already. So I'm going to go in here and add these support edges like that. And then one down here, one here. So when I'm pressing 3, I see kind of like how the high poly would look like. And this is going to be kind of stone, so I kind of, it doesn't need to be super kind of like harsh in the modeling, but it can be nice to have a little bit form like this. And now we're going to kind of sculpt it and make it a little bit damaged. Let's bring this version in now instead. And just read the chat here a little bit now. So it depends, Megan, it depends a little bit what you want to do. Like I would say, if it's like 3D sculpting you want to do, like you can pick up ZBrush. You can also pick up what people talked about here called Blender. You can sculpt in Blender also. And I think nowadays it's kind of like good enough to kind of like be able to sculpt. So one of my projects I did completely like sculpting in Blender a couple of years ago to test it basically. So there, it's possible to kind of do what we do here in ZBrush, because this, I would say I wouldn't pick up ZBrush maybe for just testing. I would probably start with Blender. And then it's basically tutorials. So exactly like jump on the donut tutorial with Blender. I think that's a great start. And I think there was a new one released now with Blender 5. And I think Blender 5 also updated a little bit, so it's a little bit more powerful when it comes to sculpting. But yeah, basically this scene was completely done with Blender sculpting. I think the part, like the last 20%, I switched back to ZBrush because this was like a couple of years ago. And I've noticed that the Blender couldn't sculpt that. Some stuff was a little bit hard to sculpt, but most things here was sculpted in Blender actually. So it's completely doable. And you can set up a Blender to kind of like work nicely as we do here, basically. But yeah, I'm going to just talk a little bit about the brushes I use usually. So let's see here. I don't have my hotkeys. I'm going to go here. Awesome. So I think the most used one I use is Move. Maybe not for this, but Move is super nice. So if we press B, we get all our brushes up. And Move is very nice to kind of change forms and stuff like that, especially when we are lower in resolution. It gets harder and harder the higher we go in resolution. So up here, we can see the resolution. So I kind of go up and down in resolution. So now I'm at 10 million, means 20 million triangles, basically. I tend to try to stay quite low in the beginning. So right now we are at 80K triangles and try to stay there in the beginning. The Move tool is the first one. The next one would be K-tubes. It's a little bit what it sounds like. It's basically a clay brush that mimics clay. Something we see directly happening here is that when I sculpt in something that has like a in and out, basically, I'm going to sculpt the backside, which is a very annoying thing. And that's just because the brush doesn't know that I want to just be on one side here. So what we need to do then is go to brush, I think. It's always hard to find this when you have it already kind of placed out. And I'm going to see if I can find it for you guys here. Back face masking. So this one, you want to click in on that brush, basically. So I have it as a quick button there. And then I can sculpt without that happening. It's very common that I sit and work like this. and then the other side is kind of like broken. The next one would be standard. So standard I use mostly for detailing. I'm going to show that later. So we can grab real textures and kind of like apply them to the surfaces, and that's a very fast way to get detail. And the last one, we want to go in here to brushes, go to trim, and trim smoother border. And this is a very kind of popular brush. So when we do kind of like stone and chisel feel, basically. So if I go here and start sculpting a little bit the corner here, and I go and jump over to this trim smooth, and I do kind of like the alpha, like the brush type will be like a square. Then it becomes basically like a much harder brush, and that way we can get a very nice kind of crystal feel, basically. Let's see, what would you say? So it depends all on the job. Like if you're applying for an environment artist, I would say then it's probably like 2 environments at least, and they need to probably be at the standard as the studio you're applying to. So I can just jump quickly to that and just talk about that quickly. But when I started, these were my 2 scenes basically. So I applied with these 2, like when I left the indie studio I was at and started to apply. And Naughty Dog was kind of my dream studio always. I live in Sweden, so I knew that I would not end up in Naughty Dog, but it was a very great kind of start to reach at. So I used that as my kind of inspiration for these 2 scenes, basically. And while working on my first scene here, I kind of like always put Uncharted next to it. And I worked on this next to these pictures until I couldn't see any difference. And I think that's kind of the big thing, is like really pushing your art to be as close as possible to kind of like a studio you are kind of like wanting to go to. Then of course, like Naughty Dog is not so accessible for someone like me in Sweden that's starting out. But this type of style is very applicable to a lot of studios. So I could end up at Starbreeze and working on the Walking Dead game, basically. And I would say that's probably my biggest tip, is to basically find a game and working towards that, basically. Character, I would say the same, Daniel. Like I would look for kind of like a game you are driven by when it comes to the visuals, and then I would just put that next to what you're working on. And I think with the characters, it's all about being able to drive likeness. So I think like a likeness study usually is quite good also. But I'm not a character artist, so I'm probably not the best to ask. Like one recommendation would be probably to reach out to a character artist in the industry. Sometimes people answer and sometimes not. But I think most people are quite kind of open and helpful. I'm going to just kind of start breaking this apart a little bit, like creating a little bit edgeware. Yeah, I really like Nobud Sculpt. Blender is coming to the iPad also. Looking forward to that. I'm going up a little bit in polygons now, so you can see here I'm jumping basically up with like shortcuts. They hinted next year, I think, like 26. So there is some videos. I think they showed it at conventions they were at. Like it's like already being tested. I think you can download it already, like with like a little bit hacks and stuff like that. But I'm just waiting for the official release. But yeah, I've been longing for that for a long time. It would be amazing. Can you explain how it works? Let's see. So I would say like when it comes to quads and like with triangles and stuff like that, like everything is being triangled in the end. Like when you put something in, like an game engine can't read anything except triangles. So everything is going to always be triangleized in the end, basically. So whatever you bring into the engine, it's going to be triangleized. So for example, all of this in the engine right now, we jump in here. I'm going to re-import this. It looks a bit. Everything is basically triangleized because an engine can't read anything else. So I would say usually I wouldn't be too worried about it. How I usually think about it is as long as nothing breaks, I kind of work fairly freely. So I think we can see wireframe if I click like this. So you can see everything it becomes triangled, or else it wouldn't render. So to be honest, I don't think that much about like triangulation and stuff like that. Like I would say when you do hard surface like cars and weapons and stuff like that, then it's a little bit more important because then you're working with like very clean forms and stuff like that. But if you do like a stone thing, like a ball like this, then it's like an organic form. It's kind of fine, I would say, as long as it doesn't break. And that's why I kind of test it in engine all the time to see if it breaks. So when I show our next trick here, I'm going to jump to that, which is basically Unreal's kind of like a website for objects. So people can upload here and stuff like that. But Quixel is like a part of Epic and they upload pictures. So we're going to download those. So I'm going to search for like a cliff or something like that. And I'm going to jump to materials here. So these are textures basically. And what I want to use is just something with a little bit like noise. Kind of like this one, I think. And then I'm going to download this 4K I'm going to use. Yeah, I mean, Blender for me has always been kind of Procreate. Like that's basically it. And no bad sculpting. So I'm looking forward to try Blender with it. And waiting for the download there to happen. Would you approach this model in a different way if you had no damage at all? Uh, uh, Great question. I would say it depends on the style. I think like with this object, I'm thinking almost like a little bit God of War-ish. Then I would always drive it in ZBrush because that's going to be kind of like the art style. So when we think of like those type of games, I think it's part of the art direction to have it being ZBrushed basically. So what I'm going to do here, let's see, you can go here and then textures, and I'm going to jump in here and unzip this. We downloaded this one. They have weird names. I usually don't change these, but I like to save them down here in my startup file. Then I can use them whenever. So now I jump to standard brush. And with standard brush, I go to my alphas. And then I jump to that folder. So I copied it. And we want to use the displacement. And that's type of texture that kind of like says what is going inwards and outwards. And you can see it's kind of like a black and white mask. So it's basically just up and down in value, basically. So if I would just go here to my standard brush and drag, we can see I can drag out all of that nice detail now. And I would say this is the biggest kind of like fast way of getting detail to your object. It's not sitting and sculpting it like handmade. That will eat too much time. So usually this is a big part of getting, especially if you want to have like that realistic feel, but even like stylized, we would just do this, but with a stylized texture instead. So what I need to do now is go here to alpha and then mid values, because then it's going to be softer on the sides, basically. It's very easy to kind of like overdo it, so I'm going to kind of like keep it fairly kind of low here. And remember what we said, like I want to test this in Engine just to see how it looks. So let's do that now. So I'm going to probably go down a little bit in subdivisions, because I just want to see kind of this detail, if that kind of works well in Engine. And of course, like right now it's 1.2 million polygons, but for testing, it's totally fine to do that. It's more like when we are done, we need to kind of clean it up. But for testing, totally fine. And I would say even now with like Nanite existing, like with Nanite, it's no problem basically. But we noticed that the normals kind of break, so we need to bring it into Maya first. So let's do that. We're kind of washing it through Maya basically. I think it's probably already fixed, so I'm going to just export it. It's probably a solution to kind of like make it kind of work directly from ZBrush. And then we're re-importing that. Well, I'm going to just pick up some comments here. From your experience, what is like working in Smolin? That's a great question. I would say, like in a small studio, it's much more about wearing a lot of hats. So when I was in an indie studio, we were around 15 people, I think. So fairly big still, like, but we were all students and we didn't know what we did basically. So everyone had to kind of like do a little bit of everything. So I did everything from characters to environments. So it was very kind of broad. And even outside of that, I did concept art. I did had to do. I'm gonna just lower the roughness here on this one. I did buying coffee and stuff like that. So very kind of like you have to kind of own a little bit everything, and it can be, of course, a bit stressful parts of that. And I would say with the bigger it gets, the more specialized it gets. So I went from indie to 2A to AAA, and AAA would be a little bit more like you're kind of like expert in one field usually, or a couple of fields. For example, I got to do like vegetation, and that was kind of my main thing, and for Avatar. But then sometimes jumping over to like normal environment art. So I would say still with like big studios, you still do a little bit like broader, but it becomes a bit more specialized. I would say style-wise, usually like AAA goes to more like realistic, but of course you have like Blizzard and stuff like that does
Did you go out?
Yeah, sorry. I think someone was there. Maybe just someone accidentally clicked. But yeah, I hope that answered the question, Jeff. But yeah, we got it in, and we can already see that it basically we get kind of like how it will look later, basically. So let's do it with like the whole piece here now instead, so we can see it a little bit more. So we're going to focus on this one. So let's jump over to ZBrush. I'm going to kind of work on this now. Split these apart. So we can see here, like the problem we talked about, like if I don't add those support edges, it's going to just become a blob. But usually what I do is I go to Dynamesh and use Dynamesh it instead. Because then it's basically faster for me to do it this way. And then we can start just creasing this a little bit, kind of adding creases here. So the goal is basically to, oops. And of course we get sometimes a little bit unclean polygons, then I just do it again basically until I get kind of like a clean foundation. Let's see. Photogrammetry, yes, I would say when you see kind of like tree trunks in games, usually, I would say those are usually photogrammetry. Another nice, so basically to explain photogrammetry is basically when you take a bunch of photos of an object and you bring that into the computer and render it out as a 3D object, basically. So you get like basically the real thing in 3D with the texture. Of course, there is some cleanup happening and stuff like that, and you need to make it game ready. And then, of course, when you do photogrammetry, it's going to be completely based on reality. So then all the kind of stuff next to it needs to kind of like feel equally realistic, basically, or you have to kind of simplify the photogrammetry you're doing. So that's always the tricky part with photogrammetry. But that's also like depending on art style. Some studios are driven very much about photogrammetry, like Dice and Bark are quite famous ones. And then you have studios that kind of using it as an addition. I know they used it quite a lot on the Indiana Jones games, but stylizing the realism basically. I'm gonna use without project instead. I think we. Let's see. Yeah, there is stressy parts about. I think the nice thing with indie is that kind of everyone by name. I kind of missed that a little bit when I was at the bigger studios, but I think everything has like their good and the bad, and then it's very kind of depending on the person also. But yeah, I think the most stressful part was that back then nobody of us had made games before, so it was very kind of like learning by doing basically. So that can eat a lot of energy also. But it was a very good experience, I would say. I feel I became a better game developer because of that. Because I feel like I'm closer to every kind of part of game development that way. Because you're kind of sitting next to everyone in a tiny room. When you use nanite instead of LOD, I think it depends on the project. I mean, Nanite has its problems. Lumen has its problem. For the past studio I worked at, we didn't use Nanite, for example, and we didn't do Lumen. It's very kind of depending on the game also. So our game I worked on was kind of catered towards very simple, like low-end computers. So it needed to kind of like work on every computer, and then you might have to kind of work with different a different kind of a way. So I would say that's always very depending. I like my theme so far has always been without nanite. I think the one I'm working on now is going to be the first one I'm using nanite. So you can do nice things without nanite. Like nanite is not the most. And I would say also like when using nanite, I feel like then you really need to make it kind of like count, meaning that then you want to push kind of the fidelity and detail enough much so it kind of matters. So maybe what I'm doing now, maybe not nanite is needed, but if we did like super realistic stuff, then it's kind of like matters more. You can get much more kind of like small frequent noise in the modeling with nanite, which is very nice. But a lot of project suffers because it's a new technology, so it's not completely figured out yet, I think. So it can also be a bit of a pitfall sometimes. Yeah, so I'm basically just chiseling every corner here. Probably not going to do the whole thing. We're gonna kind of look at baking also. I want to show all steps, but we're going to do parts of this. So I'm pressing F to focus in, basically. When you're working on stone work like this, would you prefer to method adding? So that would be basically what the same way of doing kind of the detail. I think together with the painting it out. So usually you can download like in studios. Usually there is brushes that kind of does that by you just dragging out kind of dragging out the cracks basically, because then you get more realistic cracks, I would say. So most studios usually have kind of like cracks, brushes and stuff like that. And then because then you get it much more cohesive also, what you call it, like it's gonna kind of like stay the same basically. Another way can be to kind of like paint out, maybe like taking away a little bit of one rock and breaking it apart. We can add these in here. We don't want to go like that big. Yeah, we're slowly getting there. So ZBrush is a very time-consuming method of doing detail. So that's why not every studio is driving like this. Like I said, it's very kind of driven by the art style. But the nice thing is that we get kind of like this negative space here. We get a little bit more hand painted feel in realism, I would call it. See. I think we can do this whole part, and I'm going to show the baking of this. So feel free to keep asking questions. I'm paying attention to the side here. And do one that is a bit broken, maybe. So we can duplicate this one. see. And then we can basically mask this out. Go to masking, sharpen mask. Ability, hide. So we basically have this piece. Don't want this piece. Let's see. That. Now we go to geometry. I think I have it here, delete hidden. Yeah, delete hidden. Now it's basically just this object, and then we can just dynamesh this. And then I do just the same with this one. But the other way around. Delete hidden. Now we have two rocks basically to sculpt. To fix this, we can use a new brush. So inflate. And I'm going to, of course, turn off backside culling. So this is the biggest problem with sculpting is that, of course, like things can kind of like mangle together like this. But it's totally fine. We just clean it up until it kind of like doesn't break anymore. So the goal is to get this to be bigger piece basically. We can use planer also, I think it's called. That way I can kind of flatten this again. We'll do the same with this one. Inflate. And dynamesh. So I'm smoothing here, so I'm holding in control to jump to smooth. And then control and dragging outside of here basically just recomputes the dynamesh. When I have something like this, I dynamesh, I smooth, and I do that over and over again basically. Another tool we can try out is if we go to here, so I'm holding in Control Shift up here and then trim curve. I can basically cut hard lines that way, like that. But I kind of liked how this was already, so we don't need to do that. And here we can use the move tool, basically. Move this into position. That way we have two pieces now. What is the most important shortcut in ZBrush? I mean, all this work, I would say probably this one, like control drag, like dynameshing. I think that's the most used one. But it depends also what you're doing. Like it's not always you want to dynamesh. Like when you do characters, you want to kind of stay in subdivisions. So you want to kind of be able to jump up and down in subdivisions. Then you usually try to avoid doing it. So it's very depending on what you are sculpting. Can you talk a bit more about goals when trying to accomplish? So I would say with the ZBrush, it's basically just getting kind of like a more like style-wise, getting a more kind of like sculpted feel, basically. Like some games are kind of being driven by that a little bit. Because getting this type of detail wouldn't be possible without sculpting, basically. So I would say that's kind of the goal with ZBrush in this kind of here. So I would say that's kind of like the end goal, I would say. Because you like modeling this, you wouldn't get the same kind of like sculpted feel, I would say. You can of course sculpt and like texture, but it's going to be hard to get kind of like the same visual art style, basically. Gonna inflate this one a little bit more. Hope that answered the question. Can jump back to the planar one. I'm gonna see how this right now renders in engine, like these details. So we can just get it in my end and move it over to Unreal, and we can just see what's happening, basically. And right now we are at like 4 million times 2. So 8 million triangles. So what I usually do then is basically I kind of go down. Like we barely can see any difference when I go down in these subdivisions, and that way it doesn't hurt as much to get this into Maya, or for that matter, Unreal. I'm basically keeping like after I have Dynameshed, I kind of want to be able to go up and down in subdivisions. Later, when we bake this, I'm gonna just show this. We of course want to don't have like this low res, but when testing, it's totally fine to go down, basically. Yeah, exactly. So it's saved in history, basically. So here I need to probably like unlock normals, probably. There is probably a way to fix the normals. I'm not sure why that's happening. We unlock the normals just. I think ZBrush doesn't have hard normals, actually, if I remember correctly. I actually started in Mudbox. So the school I went to had only Mudbox. So I started there, actually. Let's see. Okay, it's still importing. I don't know how Modbox is nowadays. Been a long time since I used it. So we have that kind of annoying thing where all the materials, so I'm going to just apply one material and then import this into engine. It's importing now. So this is the reason why kind of we want to sculpt this. Like we get nice highlights now. And jump here. And then later when we bake this, that's going to be driven by the low poly in the normal map. But this kind of like detail is quite hard to get if we don't kind of sculpt it. Yeah, there is a layering system. To be honest, it was a long time since I used it. But if I remember correctly, you can kind of store. I think you have to kind of like be outside of subdivisions. And then you can store and you can record. It's kind of cool. So if I sculpt now, so there is someone that has mic on that's copying. So we don't get that in the recording. So I would check that out. Sadly, I don't remember it completely, but you can kind of store what you're doing, and then you can jump back here, and then you can use morph target, I think. And that's I think that's the problem with ZBrush. There's like endless things you can do, so it's kind of hard to use all of them. I would say I have always kind of worked as simplified as possible, but yeah, morph target. My biggest recommendation when it comes to ZBrush is to go to Pavlovich, I think it's called. I think he even works with Maxon when it comes to ZBrush. He basically does a video on every new tool ever coming to ZBrush. So every time I'm kind of like unsure about a tool in ZBrush, I usually jump to his YouTube channel and you search for a tool, and he has basically a video on every tool in ZBrush. So that's a big recommendation. And he's been doing that since I started, I think almost. I remember watching him probably like 10 years ago, if not longer time ago. Let's see, we are gonna jump here. So I want to talk a little bit about, so we're going to jump to this one because it's a bit simpler and we can make a low poly out of this. So we're going to look at that now. So the biggest thing that I sometimes see is that people bake down with like this. So we always need to make sure that our resolution is as high as possible. So now it's kind of like, I don't know if you see it in the stream, but you can kind of see the squares. So you kind of want to make sure that those squares are barely visible, I would say. Of course, it does depends on like where the camera is, but when we bake down this information, it's better to just to kind of have like extra care for it. I'm going to just kind of flatten here also a little bit. The back face needs to be on planar. Pro ZBrush, so perfect time for questions. Oh, no, I'm back. Gonna jump down in poly count here. Let's jump back here. Let's, I'm gonna damage this a little bit more so we can see kind of like a bigger difference also later. I'm gonna here, and now I'm gonna have to like jump out of subdivision mode because we're gonna kind of dynamesh this. Like that. So every time I see kind of like these things happening, I kind of like dynamesh, especially when I work with like broken stuff. And that's just because like kind of like polygons we're working with, so they're gonna kind of like twist together basically. Like that. It's broken. Just catch questions here. Yeah, I would say so. I would say like I usually save the detail to last. So I would say in the beginning I would kind of do the forms first and kind of like dynamesh a lot, and then I would stop dynameshing when I'm doing kind of like the detailing. So I like now I would kind of like if we are gonna kind of add back the details, like then I would kind of stop from resetting that basically. I think Orb is probably the famous one. I don't use that many actually. I just use the standard one, but Orb brushes for like stylized stuff is very nice. It's free, I think. Yeah, this one. Like very famous one. I think most use I think even like for realism, like the orb crack ones are quite nice when sculpting kind of like damage and stuff like that. So I would say like when it comes to brushes, it's more kind of for me to work with a detail from height maps basically. Like that's kind of where I kind of pull detail from. So this stuff. So let's do a low poly out of this now to see how we go about that. So what I like to do is copy this high poly. And there is different ways of kind of doing low poly, but I still usually just go with decimation master. And I tend to like so basically it says like take away 90% of the detail now. One thing I like to do before Decimation Master is just dynamesh it. So I have a high poly copy now and a low poly copy here. So I like to use dynamesh to kind of simplify it. And then go in here to see plugins and kind of lower the amount. And if we solo this out and look at you can see it's starting to go lower. What I like to do, like nowadays, like polygons are not as kind of like expensive, but it can be nice to go down. So what I like to do is I like to have the high poly and the low poly visible like this, and basically go down until I don't see any difference. Right now we are at 4K, like 4,000 triangles on this one, which would be quite okay. It's quite a large ball. I recommend to always test also, like so I would kind of test it now to see kind of how the bake is, and then maybe I go up a little bit or down a little bit depending on if I feel like it's too low poly or too enough, basically. I'm gonna call this bowl low poly. Accidentally did visible, so it's gonna export the high poly now also, so I need to redo that. So I'm not clicking anything right now because it's exporting. ZBrush doesn't like when you... Nope, I accidentally clicked. I think it's done now. I'm going to do that again, just the low poly now. So here I want to click in selected only. And then I do the high poly. And I'm going to bake in a software called Marmoset. I'm using Marmoset 3, so fairly old. And I like to bake in this one because then I can see kind of like it's a very fast way to see kind of what I have, if it's working, etc. So I set that up. And then we bring the low poly into Maya here. There we have the low poly. And I always start with just auto UV mapping it to test the bake. Because we don't know if we are happy with the results, then it's unnecessary to sit and UV map yet. Then we bring in the high poly and low poly. And here I usually bake normal map, curvature, and ambient occlusion. Now we can see how the low poly looks without anything. And this is my favorite part, seeing it with texture on. So this is what the normal map is doing for us right now. We get all the sculpted detail from ZBrush into the low poly, basically. And what I look for when kind of doing the low poly, like in ZBrush, I'll bring back ZBrush here. Like I'm careful making this too jagged, basically. And what I mean with that is basically we want to avoid nowadays to have kind of this kind of like jaggedness. So these things happening. Like maybe if we do like super low poly, but when we go like even stylized nowadays, I would kind of like try to have it as soft as possible. And I would say this circular form is still kind of circular. We could try to just see what happens if we half this. So sometimes experiment a little bit, kind of like nothing that much happen, and maybe go down 50% again. Like now it's starting to break a little bit, but we can see. So now we are at 1K. Let's test this. And this is why I have all these software open at the same time, because I can test these things very quickly. Now this one is just 950 instead of 4K. Let's see if we get any kind of big difference, or if that downscale is worth it. I'm baking again. So I auto UV map there, just to be able to bake it. Let's see. Something broke here. Let's see. Gonna re-import the low poly. That can sometimes happen with. In the meantime, while this is baking, I'm gonna check the UV map. Something, yeah, it didn't. So auto. Now it's gonna work. And I myself, I don't see any difference. And what I wanted to show with that is that we can go quite low and still have a quite nice kind of like low poly when we are baking. So I would always recommend to do a little bit of this testing, because that question usually comes up like, how much polygons can I have? And it's a little bit like almost like an impossible questions to answer. I would say as long as it helps the mesh, you can kind of like have the polygons. I would say now we are starting to get a little bit problems here. Like I would say here, I don't like that much. So I would maybe kind of like not go like that low. So then I can go here and jump back here in history. So let's do 2K instead. So a little bit like try and error. Another thing to remember is also like, where is the player going to see this? We jump into this level here, jump into kind of player mode here. Like the player would run here, it's fairly large, so probably want it to be fairly rounded. So that's another thing we will always test basically when we are kind of testing these things in engine. That's why I have Unreal open here also. I would say a 2K one is kind of like good. So let's kind of UV map that now. Are you having issue logging into ArtStation? Yes. ArtStation has become very bad since Epic took it over, to be honest. I have a bit hard time paying for ArtStation nowadays, because I feel like it's always kind of logging out from my iPad, kind of freezes a lot. Like I feel like it's become worse, yes. This is from the past. I'm gonna kind of clean this up by going into where Hypershade and just delete all of these. That's how I get rid of those. And now we can just pick a Blin or a, yeah, like that. I would recommend still sadly to use ArtStation, because I think the power of ArtStation is that every art director, every lead knows about it, like knows how to navigate in it. And you don't want them to become confused when they are kind of visiting your portfolio. So I always recommend to use ArtStation because it's so kind of like known. Another recommendation would be when you have a portfolio piece. Usually, what happens is that when you get like when you get the portfolios, usually you have so many to go through, so you don't have time to like scroll through everything. So it can be good to know that like the first maybe first three shots are the most important one because if an art director has like 50 portfolios to go through, yeah, then then they can't like scroll through everything. So remember to put like the things you want to really show high up, basically. So I would probably use the time like to learn to build a website to just build like portfolio because I think still when I see all the kind of older art directors, they want comfort basically. So what I'm doing now is basically just UV mapping. So I'm gonna kind of redo this. Sorry. So I like to start with auto. And this is kind of like also like the annoying part with like having like we get a quick low poly for free because we are kind of like doing it in ZBrush, but it becomes much more harder to kind of like UV map it. So that's kind of the trade-off. But I'm going to show a little bit like how I go about it. So the bottom here, I can just kind of project to get. I'm selecting this and then deselecting kind of top, and then just projecting from above, and then I have the bottom. The bottom is fixed. And then I'm going to use UV map this and move that away. So now I can kind of like project from the side with this one. And now I'm going to go in here in the UV editor, select that. So I'm selecting half of it, projecting that, and I can unfold that. I get these two pieces. So it's a little bit like puzzling like this, basically, when it comes to UV mapping a triangle texture like that or mesh like this. I'm going to use UV map this and this. Let's see. And sometimes it's just cutting here. That piece and this piece. And of course, we want to kind of UV map this to kind of use the best texture space. So auto UV mapping is not that good because it's not going to give you kind of the best UV space, basically. So we kind of want to have a little bit control over what we are placing in the UV. So I'm going to cut that off. I would say they're acceptable. Like the first game I worked on, we actually didn't have money for Maya that much. So we did like our low poly and so this game basically, let's see. It was like a stylized game. We just did the low poly and the UV mapping inside of ZBrush, and that totally worked. So I would say for me, it's just that I'm kind of faster nowadays with UV mapping in Maya. That's kind of why I'm doing it. I think Risen or what it's called is very popular nowadays to do UV mapping also. 3D Coat is very good also when it comes to doing low polys. There's many ways of doing kind of things. Like 3D Coat is an amazing tool. If you guys, I think there is a free trial. It's a very fun software. So it's like ZBrush, but it's voxelization instead. You can basically sculpt without anything breaking. Yeah, I agree. It would be nice to not having to sit and do this. I mean, there is some smart kind of tools, but I think I can show that a little bit later with a scene I'm working on. Like UV is a lot about like UVing towards streams and stuff like that, like when we're not baking. So it's a lot about setting up like good UV spaces and stuff like that. But yeah, now we have some cleaner pieces here. We could probably fit something else here later on this UV space, basically. Maybe I can just add this one here. So I'm pressing G to repeat action when I'm cutting here. I can kind of quickly like sew and cut and repeat that action. I want these pieces to be together, and now I'm gonna kind of optimize here a little bit. We have half of the space still left, so that would be for another object, basically. We could cut it in half and maybe use the whole space, but sometimes I kind of like want to avoid like the seams and stuff like that, but I can show that quickly. We could technically like cut this if we need to fit it a little bit more. And this is bottom part. We could even almost like delete that. We don't need to have it that big because that's gonna always gonna be in the floor basically. So this one is not that important. I'm gonna still keep it like, because you never know if someone would put this ball like this in the ground and stuff like that. So I like to have the bottom there existing. But nice, we have our low poly UV mapped. Yeah, I would say sometimes I like to retopo in Maya, like normally. But for these objects, it's faster to do like this, basically. But if I want like clean UVs, like stuff that's going to be animated, for example, it's very important to do that. So characters, and then some certain objects. But I would say speed with like doing this is kind of much faster than sitting and building it by hand like the low poly. I use test bake. You can take in this to paint maybe, bake it down. Yes, so they're going to be sent out in a mail. I don't know, usually do a couple of days after, I think. Let's take the low poly. into Painter. So Painter is basically a texturing software. We bake the hyperlink here. Here we can actually use the textures also if we want. So let's try that. So I'm going to here. These are any good to use. And try them and see. So here in Painter, I can just drag and drop these into the base color like this. And we can do it with every node here, basically, so we can get even more kind of detail. Or even use the height. So this is kind of like another extension of using these textures. This can, of course, break. We can see it here. I think we can solve that a little bit by using triplanar instead. And of course, this becomes very noisy now. We can go here to height and lower the amount. Base color, we can lower that also if we don't want this completely. So first, I kind of want to get this into engine. So here, up here, we're going to name this. So we do ball. And now we're going to export the texture. So here I have a preset. So show this quickly. So I don't like the preset that are in Painter because the name becomes very long. So I've done my own here that are a little bit smaller. And that way it becomes a little bit cleaner with like file handling and stuff like that. So I have this Unreal ORM basically. I'm going to explain kind of every texture there. Let's make a texture folder. So we have the base color, BC. T stands for texture. So the reason why we have that prefix is so all the textures end up in the kind of like in the beginning, like when we have everything together. And then shorten the names as much as possible because then the reading becomes less. And especially this one, ORM. I'm going to open this in Photoshop here. That basically means that the ambient occlusion is packed into the red channel. The roughness, which we haven't set up yet, is in the green channel, and then the metallic, which this object probably not going to use, is in the blue channel. And metallic, we can sometimes put a little bit other things in, like for example when we do vegetation. So let's bring in the low poly in here. So I'm gonna save this over now. I want to change the direction of the broken details. We don't see it every time. So the trick would be to kind of hide it where the player will not see it. So it's kind of like visible at some of these. Maybe making two variations of this also could be an idea because we have like UV space for it also. We'll do textures now. And we can just drag and drop these. We can just drag this on, and then we get the material. I'm going to name this M-ball. And here we want to pull in the normal map and add that. And before adding the ORM, very important here to put this on mask, meaning that basically the grayscale of it is going to be more accurate. And that kind of like it means basically that we have packed this into different channels. And if we don't do mask, the roughness will kind of look wonky. So if you ever do packed mask like this and your kind of like object looks a little bit incorrectly, this is probably the problem. So every time you have a packed texture like this, you want to put it on mask. Now we can just plug this in. So I take the red channel here, plug that to ambient occlusion, and then roughness. Hiding kind of that broken part in some of these. That's so now we have it here in engine, and now we can kind of like just work between them. So first thing we want to fix is the roughness. It's just kind of one flat picture. We could pull in the roughness from our textures. Gonna jump to start content. And we take the roughness. Usually doesn't do that much. It's quite flat. It's a nice start, basically. And then we can start adding kind of like some masks and stuff like that. I like to usually have like a red color on these to see what it does, basically. So up here, these are basically mask generations. Probably most that in knows these. And this is kind of the power of course, of Painter to use these to get like really nice variation texturing. Something I like to do is kind of mix these sometimes. So taking one and then another and subtract and kind of like doing that over and over again and then getting new ones. That's quite nice. Another thing is to kind of lower this a little bit. I would say the biggest goal is to kind of get rid of it feeling too generated and stuff like that. Textures can be another way to kind of like add nice detail and stuff like that. But yeah, we can add a little bit highlights. And here with Painter, we can actually almost like Sculpt also, so we can add micro detail. That can kind of break sometimes like this. One way to a little bit fix that is to sharpen here with filters. I right-clicked, filter here, and then sharpen. Blurring can help sometimes also. Not the biggest fan of how pixelated it becomes. Oops. Okay, let's skip the height for now here. Topogun, let's see. I've heard of it. Yeah, it's so now no, I have never used Topogun. I think it's more common for kind of cleaning up character. I know like Rising UV is kind of like also one or something called like that. But yeah, I was sadly never used Topogun. And I want some kind of maybe darkening in the middle here, so we can make a folder, a mask, and then paint the mask. Again, just do a red to see it. Basically making a mask, and then inside of the mask, we can do generate some noise. And then I know it's just gonna end up kind of like there. Now we can sit and kind of export towards engine and then just re-import. That lighting is very harsh, so we can fix that by use this one. Yeah. Lowering the source angle a little bit. Any questions from anyone when it comes to anything? Good question. I think they do small updates, but I can't say on like first like what is new. I'm using the latest, but I cannot use what I used in 22, I think. When it comes to Photoshop, I usually prefer to go back in time because I feel like it's the software becomes a bit bloated. Darken here a little bit. Jumping to roughness and add a little bit like roughness variation now, starting to do that. Yeah, I got very sad when I know that they update it by default now. Like if you don't turn that off, and they just delete the old Photoshop. So they took away my old Photoshop without me agreeing to it. I'm using 21 now, I think. Like that's the furthest back you can go nowadays. Yeah. I mean that's why I kind of prefer Procreate in to paint, but there's some things like I can show a little bit like what I use Photoshop maybe for when it comes to like 3D. Gonna, oops. Marmoset is very expensive rendering wise, so I'm gonna turn that off. Not sure why everything just stopped. So it's loading. Yeah, I mean, of course, like working on games, it's a bit too time consuming to jump between iPad and stuff like that. So I need Photoshop for certain things. And I can show that. I'm gonna just see if the lag disappears. I'm gonna lower the rendering here a little bit. But for some reason, it's really laggy right now. I'm gonna turn off all the. My RAM is struggling with the streaming at the same time. Just save this and maybe turn off. Oops. So they are hinting on that it will come to PC actually, if you guys haven't heard. Like hinted it in a comment on Twitter. So probably will be a while, but it's coming. Yeah, exactly. Uh, Affinity, I heard, is quite good. I haven't tried it. I used it on iPad, but this one is free now. So it's fairly similar to Photoshop, and it's completely free now. So Affinity can be a recommendation for anyone. Let's see, my computer woke up now. I'm gonna have to close ZBrush, sadly. So let's save these. We have them. Yeah, photo. The only annoying thing with that one is that you have like a commercial blinking on the side always. But yeah, it's super good, Jeff, suggestion. So I know that Clip Studio Paint is kind of like for painting very nice, but I haven't used it for 3D work that much. But Krita is nice, GIMP is nice, so there is so many options. It's just that I'm kind of like a comfortable person when it comes to like Photoshop is so ingrained in my workflows. For example, an example of what I use Photoshop for. I think I'm doing it right now. Yeah, so here, I'm gonna show that quickly. So when doing tileable textures, I like to plan them in Photoshop. Because you can do add and preview. So if we would do like a stone wall, I can paint tileable textures in here, which is very handy. Can do a stone wall like this. And then later I would take this, when I'm happy with it, I would take it and model on top of it, basically, when I am happy with how it looks, basically. So very fast to do those things. I can do a tileable. Of course, you can do that with the designer nowadays, but for me, it's very nice to plan like this. And then same with like vegetation, what we looked at last month. That's also what I use Photoshop for a lot. So I can show you a tip there, yeah, how I solved that. So we can open it up. So a little bit mean, but I just take like Procreate PureF like this, and then you can just put it in front of the commercial like this. So that's a tip for you, yeah. But yeah, I haven't used this one, but if I would use it, I would maybe like, I mean, it's like 3 months, so it would be nice if they can just, you can buy it for forever. Like, yeah, I would say like Photoshop is not that kind of used in industry anymore. Um, Maybe like if you are a concept artist and more, but I can show here kind of like what I use it for. Jump into my current project here. So stuff like this when I'm planning out trim sheets. So here I have like a metal trim sheet, so I can paint that out. And then I can kind of like plan here and UV map it. So I'm gonna jump to, and then I can just UV map it on top of the mesh here, basically. So I don't need to do like a finished texture yet. I can just kind of map it here, see that it works in engine, have the, even a reference when painting it here. And then I can just paint it out and then UV map it and have it kind of like in engine very early on. And then later I would do the proper realistic version basically on top of this. So that's kind of what I use mostly Photoshop for. And then paint overs when feedbacking. But yeah, this is kind of like how I use ZBrush, I would say. Like there is so many other ways of using ZBrush, but I would say it's very depending on the art style, I would say. So some games are very driven by ZBrush, and they are usually on the organic side, kind of semi-realism or organic side. So the God of Wars and stuff like that, you see a lot of ZBrush being done. Um, any other questions? It doesn't have to do with ZBrushing. If anyone has any questions, we still have a couple of minutes left. Keep texturing a little bit on this one. Yeah, I would say like we can make ZBrush very complex, but I tend to work very simple with it. Um, like when it comes to stylization, there is of course a little bit other things, but kind of same there. Let's work on the roughness here a little bit. I just make a roughness folder. Currently, my plan is to bide my time, improving my art skill, learn Blender. So you said that you are kind of towards character artist, Daniel? If I remember correctly, you were. So that would be probably the first thing. I would probably like really. Okay. Yeah, I would probably like really like focus on one. Like you really need to know kind of what you want to kind of do. So that comes down both in terms of style. So you want to do realistic or kind of semi-realistic or stylized. And then it's department also. So we can maybe open up, let's see here. I have this, no worries, have a good evening, Vita. This is my kind of like knowledge Miro basically. But yeah, I would say like there's so many things when it comes to, for example, environment artists. So you don't want to kind of do environment art and character and so on. You probably want to kind of focus in on one if you want to move over to 3D. And then like my biggest tip is kind of like when it comes to, so we can talk a little bit about job hunting. Like how I kind of went about it was, I'm going to pull up something here. Give me a second. So this website even exists when when I started many years ago. Have a good one. So this website is very nice. So I'm going to use where I'm located, Stockholm. So basically, you click on the city you are situated in. So we have Stockholm here. It's quite insane how many studios it is in small Stockholm, but 2 pages basically. I basically copied over all of these to an Excel sheet. So that was a long time ago. I don't have that anymore, but I have an example here I showed to other students. So here is just an example I showed to another student who was based in England. We started with like just 2 studios. So I would just add every studio here. And that research is kind of needed. And I just put them in an Excel sheet. The next thing I would do is go on kind of LinkedIn. So we go to Frontier Development here. And then I would look for junior artists. So you want to kind of search artists and you want to kind of like skim through here until you find people that recently joined. So I found Harry here. I'm going to go to that artist's ArtStation. And I would just kind of like add every junior you can find to that studio, their artist, their ArtStation or their portfolio. And you get a very kind of honest, this is what needed is to get hired basically for that particular studio. And I did that basically for kind of like every studio around my town. So I was from the middle of Sweden, and I did that for Gothenburg. I did that for Stockholm. and I had like a long list, and I had kind of like the recent person that joined and kind of their latest project that they got hired by. So here we have JagX, so George's project was this project basically. And that becomes a very kind of honest, kind of like this is needed to end up in that particular studio. And that helped me a lot when starting out, kind of like just having that in front of me. So I knew kind of like, okay, I need this to end up in that type of studio, basically. So that would be kind of my biggest recommendation, is to do kind of that type of research. Um, the uh, Yeah, so when it comes to 3D modeling, I would probably start with a very like small object, basically, like build an asset, basically. So you can see George here. We can like see his whole history, basically. So starting with a prop and learning the kind of just fundamentals of building a prop, and then of course texturing it, UV mapping it, and presenting it. And I think this is a perfect size of a prop. And that was 5 years ago. And then some stylized art 4 years ago. So ZBrushing, even animations, that's very cool. So you can see there is kind of like a timeline here. And I think that's kind of like really helpful to just see kind of like what people have done, basically, to then later end up in a studio, basically. So it was not just one scene, it was a couple of scenes. And then of course we don't see the whole kind of like history here. I mean, if I open my kind of like unfinished project, it's like an endless list of projects. So there's a lot of course, also try and error with projects that never kind of end up being finished also. But yeah, that would be kind of my biggest recommendation. Um, I learned a lot about from listening to podcasts also. I think there is a lot of like 3D podcast out there, from like if you search for like find an artist. Most artists from different studios have done podcasts, and then you can get like a little bit of kind of their usually a podcast, they talk about their history. So I learned a lot by that, like listening to the people's like where they started and their path. And something you learn is that it's a bumpy road and it takes a lot of time and luck, of course. But I think you can always kind of build up on the luck, and that's gonna being proactive and doing things like this, basically. Uh, is there any other questions before we wrap up for this year? I think we're gonna have actually a stream in January or February that's gonna be specifically for portfolio, actually. So that's gonna be in, I don't know if it's the next one or the one after that, but it's gonna be kind of like where I talk about like portfolio. So I'm gonna do a presentation on portfolio for juniors. I've done some in the past. So if you go to Vertex School's YouTube channel, I think there is some. I did one on like just how to kind of like start a scene inside of Unreal, for example. How to do vegetation we did last month. Yeah, I would recommend to do that. No worries, Daniel. I think like my biggest recommendation is like friends and families. That's why I always kind of suggest to find communities, and that can be online, but also outside of online is very nice. So local art things is very. I feel like every time I go to like a drink and draw, so those are basically that you go to a cafe and then you drink coffee or take a beer and draw with people. Those are usually a really big boost of energy for me, at least. Because I think that's a big thing is like it's very common that we sit and do art and we are very like, of course, passionate and focused inwards. But I think sometimes just meeting other people that are kind of like in a similar position and learning from those, but then also kind of giving something to those helped me a lot, at least. So local events, game jams. I think game jams are very popular, like online, but also in most cities. Um, but yeah, always fun to sit and do some art with all of you. I wish everyone happy happy holidays. A good start in the new year, and yeah, I see you all next year again in the next stream. So these are going to be kind of every month, I think. So in January and then in February again. So have a good one, everyone. And I want to also end that if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, like on my ArtStation or LinkedIn. But yeah, have a good one, everyone. Bye bye.